Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Matthew chapter 5, and we're taking all the time to deal with and talk about Jesus' teaching on the subject of divorce and remarriage. Now, let me remind you that this wasn't a family teaching series that Jesus was doing. In his addressing the disciples, he is talking. Um, he's actually, he's addressing various religious mindset that I'm going to say that was probably, well, not probably, but it resulted in the contamination of of the people from the as a result, of the Pharisees. All right. So a lot of the teaching when we what we call the Sermon on the Mount was, in a sense, to straighten out bad theology, bad religion, corrupt religion, and this mindset, which, by the way, we still wrestle with. Okay, we still wrestle with that. Now, we're talking about when Jesus said that if you divorce someone, and apparently under the Pharisees, which later we will see, they did a whole lot. In other words, that the religious corruption was profound with them. It was just unbelievable. And so, for example, while they were very pious, while they were strict adherences to the law, or at least some of it, they also, depending on, for money's sake, they would bend the law. And so, same thing when it comes to divorce and remarriage. And we have the same mindset today. Now, I've been associated with a lot of churches where, on the one hand, people are very strict in their religion, strict in their practice. But then, especially in this area of divorce and remarriage, I can't tell you how many pastors, how many elders divorce and remarriage. They get a pass because of their association with the pastor. But yet, on the other hand, if you're not in that circle, you get ostracized, okay? I'll give you one more thing before I get back to the scriptures, though. We see the same thing with politics today, how many evangelical Christians will, many evangelical Christians will be very strict when it comes to certain biblical principles, but yet turn a blind eye when it came to their politics and who they elected for president. In other words, all of those sins were completely ignored, tolerated. And here's my challenge, though. But if I was to live that way, if I was to act that way, would they treat me the same way? And of course they wouldn't. They would condemn me and run me out of town on a rail. But all right, let's get back to it, because there is a couple of things that I wanted to. We're talking about divorce and remarriage, but also why what is the issue of divorce and remarriage? And of course, as I did say, we are dealing with how people think about what divorce is. Now, there are a lot of people. Let me just go back to it. In verse 31, and when he says, it was also said, Now, when he used this statement, lets us know what he's contrasting is what the traditions evolved to, probably from the Pharisees. So he said, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a written notice of divorce. Now, of course, that's kind of half the story from the scriptures. We actually went to Deuteronomy 24, you remember. But then he said, but I tell you, everyone who divorces his wife, except in the case of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries the divorced woman commits adultery. Right? So why does he say he causes her to commit adultery? Because notice he said, if she marries again. In other words, he's given God's highest standard. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to look at another passage here. Let me go to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. Now, one of the challenges, and to me, it's not so much as a challenge. It's sometimes disheartening because of how people today have bent you can say bent the rules when it comes to their circumstances. So when you have today the status of how many, and one of the issues, how pervasive it is, how many people are involved in divorce and then remarriage. It's kind of stunning, all right? This is Mark chapter 10, and it said, and he set out from there and went to the region of Judea and across from the Jordan. The crowds converged on him, and again, as he usually did, he began teaching them. Once more, some of the Pharisees approached him to test him. They asked him, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? He replied to them, what did Moses command you? He said, Moses permitted us to write divorce papers and send her away. Now, Jesus, remember in Matthew chapter 5, he deals with what exactly that command was. But watch how Jesus now responds to this. Verse 5 says, but Jesus told them, he wrote this command for you because of the hardness of your heart. But from the beginning of the creation of God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, man must not separate. Now, in the house, the disciples questioned him again about this matter. It's kind of mad how they was like, wait a minute, Jesus, we need clarification, right? And by the way, some of the apostles were married, if not most of them. We'll see that in another study. We'll be introduced to Peter's wife. He says to them, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. Also, if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. Now, there are Christians who will use this reasoning for their divorce. The problem is that I shouldn't say most because I don't know the number, but a lot of divorces for sure within the Christian church is not about adultery. Okay, they're just not getting along for whatever reason. And as I kind of mentioned in the last study, they've even added, they say where there are, I think, 3 or 4 what they call A's for biblical divorce, even though they never cite any biblical verses to back it up. One is adultery. Well, that is backed up by scripture because we're reading it here. But the other one is abuse. Then the other one is abandonment. Now, again, to those two, no word the scripture ever says or supports that. So you may say, well, what if you're in an abusive marriage, abusive let me see, did I list those correctly? Adultery, abandonment, abuse. Okay, yes. I think I'm missing one of those A's though. But the fact is, other than divorce, there is no biblical reason for divorce. And we're going to talk about where they twist this idea of abandonment. But nowhere it doesn't say that. So if it's not adultery, and then notice this, remember Jesus is speaking under the law. Under the law, he's speaking this. He's saying adultery is the only reason, only biblical reason for divorce under the law. Okay? So at the very least, if you're not, if that's not what you have, then in a sense, now watch this. So then if you divorce and then you get married again, God does not recognize your marriage. Right? This is what he says right here. He says, whosoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. Also, if she divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery. So in other words, other than adultery, so a divorce and remarriage, other than adultery, you're living in adultery. So if I divorce my wife and then I go out and marry somebody else, I am living in adultery. You can say I'm living in sin. You can also say then that is a marriage that God does not recognize. And that's important to understand. But now remember, this is under the law. But let me show you on this, and we left off with this last time in Ezra. So in Ezra, they had a very interesting situation. And you remember one of that the exiles who went back to Israel to resettle in Israel after the 70 years exile started marrying the pagan women. Now let me go back to chapter 9, and you can see from verse, let's see, verse 1 says, the people of Israel, the priests and the Levites, have not separated themselves from the surrounding people who detestable practices are like that of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Amorites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. He said, indeed, the Israel men have taken some of their daughters as well as for themselves and their sons, so that the holy seed has become mixed with the surrounding peoples. Now get this. The leaders and officials have taken the lead in this unfaithfulness. Now, I want to skip down because, and again, this is not about racial separation. And I say that because even in 2024, there are people who do not believe in interracial marriage. They think it's a sin. They think it's not natural. I'm not going to deal with that. But yes, even in 2024, people believe that. There are Christians who believe that. There are Christians who, there were the whole entire schools that had laws, had rules of separation. Okay, that forbid, would kick you out. Okay, if you dated or married somebody outside of your race. What the command here was, and the command was only for Israel, was that they could only marry someone within the Israelite nation. Now there were exceptions to that. The exceptions the exceptions were if someone came to the Lord, embraced the Lord, then they were allowed to not only marry, but to be, they could be a part of the Israelite community. In other words, the foreigners who embraced the God of Israel could be a part of Israel. In every way, they can be a part of the Israel in every way. They were counted and considered as Israel. So, for example, in Jesus' bloodline, there are at least 3 women, pagan women on top of that, that are in directly Jesus' bloodline. Tamar, who was Judah's daughter-in-law, his son had died, and he went and he actually went away for about a 20-year period. He went away and lived in one of the foreign lands, and he married a foreigner, and so he ended up sleeping with his daughter-in-law after the death of his son, and she became pregnant. The other woman was Rahab, who was a harlot, and she hid the spies. And then the other was Ruth, a Moabitess. Okay, and if you just kind of look at one of the people that he listed here, Moabites, and Ruth was a Moabite, but because she embraced the God of Israel, again, not only was she allowed into the nation, but she was, I want to say what, maybe the great, maybe great grandmother of King David. Okay, so again, so understand what was God's aim. It was to keep Israel holy. So that was the point here. They sinned by marrying pagan. Okay, so these women that they married, they were not in any way, um, they were not in any way godly. Okay, so as a result of that, God did not recognize their marriage. Now watch this. Let's skip down to chapter 10, and I'm gonna pick it up about verse 2, and then he says, then Shenichaniah, son of Jehiel, an Emulite, responded to Ezra, we have been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women from the surrounding peoples. But there is still hope for Israel in spite of this. Let us therefore make a covenant before our God to send away all of the foreign wives and their children, according to the counsel of my Lord and those who tremble at the command of God. And they said it be done according to the law. And he said, get up from this matter is your responsibility, and we will support you. Be strong and take action. Now notice, God did not recognize these marriages. Therefore, to rectify the sin of marriage, of the unbiblical marriage, notice what they said was, we're going to send them away. Now, here is the sad thing. Some of them had already started producing what? Children. And by the way, just on a side note, this is why the genealogies were so important, because you wanted to make sure that the bloodlines were accurate. These children were not counted in the bloodline. Okay. I also say this as a side note. This is one of the reasons what produced the Samaritans. Okay, when some of these mixture people begin to mix, all of a sudden they were laying claim that, hey, we are just as much as the children of Abraham as you guys are. All right. But let's skip down and look at this. He gives a whole list here of, look at verse 18. The following were found to have married foreign women. And then let's get down, because notice the conclusion of this. He says, all of these, look at verse 44, all of these had married foreign women, and some of the wives had given birth to children. Now, here's the interesting thing here. That the interesting thing was, God did not, again, recognize their marriage. God did not recognize their marriage. Um, okay, I have to check one thing here. Okay, yeah. All right, let me go back. I want to just kind of, because I have to deal with this too. Since I just kind of dropped this bomb right here. So let's talk about Christians today. What is the standard for Christianity today? All right, let me go back to Mark chapter 10 and notice this. Let's go back. And I'm gonna obviously pick it up in the next study. Um, and I deal with these kind of subjects only because in our journey through Scripture, we don't get a chance to deal with these kinds of subjects. So I take a little more time to kind of cover them, and then I'll kind of pick up the pace and move through the Scripture. But notice again, they asked him, verse 2, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? So we're going to apply this now to Christianity, to Christians today, with a twist. Because a lot of Christians use this. Now watch this. They said Moses permitted us to write a divorce papers and send her away. But Jesus told them, he wrote this command. He wrote this command for you because of the hardness of your heart. But from the creation of God made them male and female. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Now, we could go a lot of ways with this as well, which we won't. We can certainly go into the direction of same-sex marriage, in which here Jesus affirms that there was no same-sex marriage, that God made them male and female. He said, for this reason, a man leaves his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. Now, let me say this one thing here, because some of the same people, let's say, who divorce and remarry, if I make the statement to you, which I am making the statement to you, that same-sex marriage, God does not recognize the same-sex marriage for this reason. This is not whom God is joining together. In other words, God is not joining together as one flesh, man, man, or woman, woman. Okay, he's not, or man and dog, or woman and dog. You have seen some of these things, right? Now, from a legal standpoint, in the culture standpoint, I'm not getting involved with that. I don't care. If you want to marry a person, marry a same-sex person, do you. I'm not going to get into that. And I do think it's kind of a foolish move for Christians to make that their stand, because you're no longer preaching the gospel. But here's my point, that if you're going to make the stand against same-sex marriage, but yet at the same time, you're going to elect a president that's been 3 times divorced, and I would say this, that the person that then, according to God's word, the woman that he's married to now is not his wife. Why? God doesn't recognize unbiblical marriages. That's why. So this is what he says right here. The two should become one flesh. All right, we're definitely going to pick this up in the next study. And we're going to pick this up in the next study, because I want to get into the New Testament, what the New Testament standard is, and to get into the New Testament. And let me see here. Oh, okay. To get into the New Testament, okay. What does God command us in the New Testament? And this is where I'm going to go with this. But I'll pick this up in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to the Bible Plain and Simple. And if you have any thoughts or comments, add them to the comment section. All comments are welcome. And I'll see you in the next study.